Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. We're just going to wait for a couple of minutes as people are logging in. Now that we're right at the top of the hour, we're going to give them a minute or so, and then we will get started on today's discussion. Thanks so much for attending today, and we look forward to having not only your participation, but if you have any questions, make sure you put them in the chat box, and we will do our best to get to everyone's questions, and we'll follow up with you if we do not get to them. Also, this will be recorded and it will be available on YouTube in a couple of days for you able to review it as well. So let's go ahead and get started. First of all, thank you very much for today's session. I want to thank everybody for participating. As some of you know that have been on these in the past, we put together a series of public service announcements, if you will, for SMB leaders as to what are some simple and easy things they can do to get started. We had the first couple of sessions regarding compliance and what can they do to get started as it relates to compliance. We've had the folks from NIST and from the Center for Information Security participating in those two for us. We've also talked about cyber insurance, and we had the gentleman from Aon helping out with that, as well as we've continued to add to that. Today, we're going to talk specifically about successfully using partners to enhance your security capabilities. You'll see that we will have upcoming sessions specifically from not only MSPs, how MSPs can help small businesses, but you'll see we have ones coming up on what small businesses can do to get started. So we have a series of 12 to 15 of these webinars that will take place over the coming months. But today's session is very specifically around successfully using partners to enhance your security capabilities. I want to thank everybody for participating today. Krista, my colleague here at IGI Cyber Labs, will be in the background. She will answer any questions you have as it relates to the chat questions, and will be responsive to anything that you might need as it relates to follow-on activities. With that, I wanted to introduce Todd Fitzgerald. Todd is the author of the CISO Compass and has been a very successful global CISO for a number of major corporations prior to that. He and I have known each other for a long time. We got together a couple of months ago and built out what this series should look like and what SMBs would need to get safer, stronger, smarter, better, with the limited skills, the limited resources, and the limited knowledge they have around security. So we're fortunate enough to have Todd with us today. Let me go through a couple of housekeeping things, and then I will turn it over to Todd to introduce today's panel. As I said, everything will be recorded, so it will be available later on YouTube if you want to watch it at a later date. Please ask your questions, put them in the chat box. We are also interested in follow-on topics and presenters. We've got a series of them on our website. We've got a series of them on LinkedIn. But please provide us additional topics and additional presenters you're interested in hearing from. With that, I want to remind everybody the chat box is available. I want to thank today's panel discussion. And once again, let me turn it over to Todd so he can introduce the group.
Well, thanks a lot, Stuart, and it's a pleasure to be here today. This is something I'm very passionate about because our small, medium businesses are really that fabric that we all depend on. Large organizations have lots of funding, but smaller organizations don't. And so, how do we get the best value for our dollar? Because we're all connected in this together, and we all need to make sure that we have that protection. I'm pleased to present our panel today. We have Bezawit Sumner. She is a very experienced compliance and security professional. She has worked in the federal and state space with many different frameworks such as high trust. She has done SOC 2 compliance, and it's a pleasure to have her here today with her desire to operationalize compliance and security. Thanks for joining us, Bezawit. And David Tyree, I've known for many years. He's been in IT in his 20+ years. He's been focusing on security and risk management. David has worked for MSSPs. He has been on that side of the fence, helping with sales as a technical resource. And he has provided advice to companies and currently serves as a vCISO, helping to bridge that gap with organizations to fill those needed skill sets. So welcome, David.
Thank you.
So what I'd like to do is start us off today. I think, we need to look at why we're here. We need to look at what are these business requirements for security. Because security is about securing our organizations, not an end to itself, but how do we help our organizations out? We will talk about ransomware in the news. Dave is going to walk us through a quick scenario of that. We'll talk about the key security trends that are impacting us and how things are changing. We'll talk about the different execution strategies that you can do when you're partnering with an MSSP. We will compare those different options and what the pros and the cons are of those, and then talk about some typical MSSP services that you may be wanting to look at. And then finally, that call to action. What is that shopping list that we should be looking at? So we'll go through each of these areas. I'd like Dave to start us off with, let's talk about the business requirements for security that takes us to this place where we need an MSSP.
Okay, thanks, Todd. I've found over my 20 years of experience in security that sometimes it helps to have a simpler message because security can be very, very complicated. And what I've realized is there's really 5 core business requirements, the things that the business people want out of technology and security to deliver, right? So number 1 is controlling access. If you go back to the earliest days of computers, there was a mainframe, there was a green screen, there was a cable, and security did access control. With the new identity, this has gotten much more complex, but it is still one of the most important components of security. Number 2 is prevent incidents from occurring. And there are so many different types of incidents and a way they occur. And a lot of what we're doing is deploying all these technologies and services to help prevent those incidents. We can't obviously protect and prevent every kind of incident, so we need to have good detect, respond, recover capability. If you walk into a bank, they don't have 6-inch steel doors and armed guards everywhere. They have really good detection and response capability, so when something happens, they can do something about it. You've got stakeholders, you've got regulators, you've got partners, you've got customers that are expecting you to be able to prove that you're secure and compliant. And this is the heat on this has been turning up. And this last one, people don't always see it, but it's always there, which is don't let security get in the way of the business. Don't spend a lot of money on security is one. Make sure that you provide a good user experience. I'm sure everybody has had struggled with logging on to something, right? And that's sometimes a very bad user experience. There are things where the business people can go and download an app or use an app on their home system that they use to get their job done. And your corporate security team blocks it because it's not approved. It doesn't have all of the security features in it. So there are a number of, and then don't slow your projects down. If security stops stuff from getting implemented, that gets in the way of your increasing sales and generating business.
Has security been seen differently these days? Are organizations really looking at security as that true enabler of business and reducing the friction to security, or is it still seen as that roadblock or something that, you know, is necessary as a cost to the business?
I mean, I've seen that depending upon which of these is most important, there's like each organization has kind of a culture that kind of drives things. And you know, more mature organizations realize that they can't prevent every incident, and they do really well with detect, respond, recover capability. There's a lot of regulated business that spend all their time and effort on compliance. And often they forget about, you know, getting in the way of security. So there's many different kinds of businesses, and they have their own culture and prioritize things based on what's important to them.
I mean, Bez, you've worked with a lot of the frameworks and stuff. Do they see those as helpful, or are they getting in the way?
I think really helpful, and we've seen this even in our line of business in the healthcare organization, where, you know, people will go out and get the business, but the crux of the question is, how secure are you, or what have you done to implement security, from the compliance frameworks to the federal and state regulations. So it is striking that balance of to be secure and compliant, but not to have the compliance outweigh the security aspect of it, and to consider the user experience. But it's also, personally, from my standpoint and internally at our organization, is working with the different teams to understand that we're not trying to get in the way as much as we're trying to provide the guardrails. So we don't come at the end and say, why did you do X or Y? So it's an important aspect, and people are becoming more aware of data privacy and what companies are going to do. So when you implement that additional control to log into an account, people may not have understood it before, but I think they get it now when they see Colonial Pipeline and you have issues getting gas, and it strikes you as security is important beyond company.
So do you think working with an MSSP, does that make that easier to, you know, to not be seen as in the way of business, or is it more difficult?
I think it makes it easier, because knowing the organization or the department you're working with or the industry you're in, and getting that expert, or, you know, an organization that's focused on just managing your security and your overall service that you're providing from an IT standpoint, I think you get to focus on everything else that you need to do for the user interface, and there's a whole department or whole vendor that's doing the security aspect of it. So I think you can merge those two and have a seamless process, hopefully.
Yeah, MSSPs are going to do a very good job at number 3. That's one of their big focuses, is building out that detect, respond, recover capability. And when you have that in place and you're not trying to do it yourself internally, you're going to be in much better position to prove that you're secure and compliant. So in line with this, that's how they're going to really help you out.
Gotcha. And today with the ransomware attacks, you know, we've clearly needed that detection capability to know if somebody's in our systems.
Yes. Okay, next slide. So what I want to do is just kind of walk you through, you know, the worst possible incident out there that can occur today, which is ransomware. And just walk you through how this happens. So the adversary starts off by doing his research, right? He figures out who he wants to go after and why. Can you pay? It's all about making the money anymore. They're going to build their attack plan. They're going to understand your technologies. Then they're going to launch that attack, right? They're going to go and get into your business, and they're going to compromise a host. Once they've done that, they establish command and control. They go and they expand their access to all the systems where your data resides and that are going to be critical for running your business, and they get everything pre-staged. And then when they're ready, they're going to launch that attack. You know, they'll send out their ransomware demands, you know, and they'll tell you what they've stolen and work on starting to negotiate. Let's see, let's go here. So in between day 1 and day 2, from the point in time when that host is compromised till they actually launch, This can be from days to months. It takes them time to download and exfiltrate the data. They don't want to get caught. It takes them time to discover all the systems so that they can get everything set up in one day on this day 2 to launch that attack, encrypt all of your data, and be in a better position to get the biggest payday that they can. You know, after that, then when day 2 hits, right, your incident response team is going to have to launch, right? You're going to have to figure out what you're going to do. Can you recover those systems? You know, obviously legal and insurance will be involved. Your insurance provider may be able to pay off some of the ransomware. You're going to have to assess your damage and then decide if you're going to negotiate and pay. Usually it requires that you bring in experts to help you with that because they've done it many times before. Finally, then you're going to have to recover your systems. You're going to have to get the adversary out of your systems because if you don't, they'll just keep coming back, stealing more data and relaunching the attack. And then you may have an incident disclosure. If your data has been stolen, you may have reporting requirements for that. So when you look at the impact, dollars, right, you're going to pay ransom, you've got a disclosure, your business is outage, whatever regulatory fines. You look at Target and Marriott and those companies, you know, their brands took a hit. All the time and effort for recovery, it's hundreds of hours. And then, of course, somebody's got to be blamed for it. You've seen with Target, the CIO and CEO both lost their jobs as a result of a bad ransomware attack.
So do you think with this ability to pay with a, you know, being a smaller organization that you're safer, that the, you know, are the proceeds seen not to be as large, or is the fact that you're with an MSSP that maybe you can get more money?
You know, I think that they're always trying to, they do their homework because they can go and compromise a lot of systems and then they pick out which ones they're going to go after. The ransomware companies will pay their partner that provides the ransomware kit up to 50% of the ransom that they get. So, you know, it's a complete business ecosystem that's driving this. And at the end of the day, it's all about making money. And that's what they're trying to do the same way every other business is trying to maximize their revenue.
And to that, I'll add, one of the things to look for when you're dealing with an MSP or an MSSP is the cyber insurance that they as a company have. Because if you're outsourcing and you're relying on them, you have to anticipate for when an incident happens, what coverage you're going to have with that relationship. So I think that's also an important aspect.
And so they could be aware of that as well and aware of a higher payout potentially, which could increase your likelihood as a target.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And just as a reminder to everybody, please put your questions in the chat as we go through, and at the end, we will answer as many of those as we can.
Okay, so when you look at a typical attack, your adversary is going to go after to get to an endpoint inside your organization, right? And they've got a standard methodology that they go through where they research, they do their homework, they build their package, they deploy it. They're going to try to get stolen credentials, right? This is where identity and access control comes in to be very important. They may also go after vulnerabilities on systems to gain access. So once they've done that, see next, Krista, can you press it? Thank you. So once they've done that, then they're going to launch that attack against other systems. They're going to get stolen credentials, they're going to exploit vulnerabilities, they're going to get to targets, and then they're going to take and establish command and control and take that data and pull it back out of the organization. So one of the key things to remember here is the adversary lives on the endpoint. And even though we put a lot of prevention tools, antivirus and things, they're working to figure out how to beat that. They'll figure out what you've got and then launch an attack that bypasses those things. The managed service providers use tools that are very good at detecting these kinds of attacks and these kinds of things going on. They may not always catch the first attack, but they may get some of the second or third attacks, and that's how you're protected then, or starting to get protected, or at least can detect them. Then remember, you have weeks or months sometimes from the point in time where they get this first host till they get to all of the other things.
So what are some of these trends that are affecting us that can create some greater vulnerabilities in our system through this whole chain?
Well, I mean, you know, that there's, you know, that the attackers continually change what they're doing. They use new tools, they partner with different people, and they're constantly updating to, you know, it's an arms race. Who's going to build a better tool? Is the MSSP, is the antivirus company, or is the attacker? So you've got to make sure that you're with somebody that's up to date and can continually maintain that system. Otherwise, you'll fall behind.
And when you look at the middle point, you know, portion under exploitation, you have the stolen credentials and phishings. Those things they have in common are our end users, our staff, our contractors, anyone who has access to our systems, especially the privileged accesses. So the human factor and ensuring that we are educating our, you know, our staff, our employees, and making sure that our managed service providers also have the same level of training for their staff is going to be vital, because that I think of phishing and stolen credentials as sort of like your 80-20 rule. Like if I can get people to interact with emails in a more mindful way, to not just click, to not just respond quickly or download attachments, and to get away from bad practices of reusing passwords across systems, or even especially from personal to professional or to your work world. So you have a lot of advantage if you know, depending on your budget or the resources you have. Focus on training your individuals and ensuring you hold your vendors, including MSPs, accountable for that.
Yeah, if you hire professional pen testers, those are going to be the top two vectors. Number one is that they'll use phishing. Number two is that they'll go out and find the giant list of compromised passwords and try to run those against your users, match those up. That's how they get in most of the time.
Absolutely. So what are some of those security trends that are impacting the organizations?
Remote work right now, everyone is home, different networks. Everyone's gonna at some point talk about cryptocurrency or Bitcoin. Everyone has some form of a desire to get into that environment, or people who didn't care about it before do so now. And I think just the continued use of various personal devices, so your mobile device management and so forth. I'll focus on those.
Krista, could you go to the next slide?
Yeah, I think this last year we've seen that expansion, as Bez is indicating, into that remote workforce. What are some of those other things there, Dave?
Yeah, I mean, I talk about these sort of things with clients in terms of the big shifts, right? So we're shifting from everything is on-prem to more cloud and managed services, and instead of taking and bolting on a best-in-class point solution, integrated suites cover all of those different things. We used to rely on trusted networks and segmented networks, and because devices are everywhere, it's owned by everybody, right? We're moving more towards zero trust and using identity as the basis for security. The other one here that's important from a managed security services company, they're typically doing, looking at security alerts, pulling them into a SIM to analyze those things and find adversaries. That's more shifted into the EDR, endpoint detection and response tools that are on your endpoints. And then everything is moving to cloud. you have to use the cloud log sources to be able to detect the adversary, and then security orchestration and automated response is that everything in here is moving towards automation. So if I can automate something, I can do it at a higher quality and I can do it faster. So those are really the important things when it comes to looking at MSSP.
With SOAR, yes?
I'm curious, we're seeing, with the hybrid workforce and somewhere between, 25% and 75% either working a day or week at home or completely at home, the vulnerabilities of those devices on those home Wi-Fis and those other personal devices seem to be causing great concern for the small businesses. Could you guys comment maybe on, what a small business leader can do to kind of help in that area and how they can work with their MSPs with all the people working remotely?
Sure. I mean, when we look at core prevention tools, right? Number one thing is make sure that your devices, your endpoints are configured according to standards and that they're configured securely, right? Then you need to validate that. You need to have tools, vulnerability scanning tools, configuration management tools to do that. And you have to have some way to kind of compliance interface to report on it. So you can track it, manage, and demonstrate to your stakeholders that it's secure. So those are really critically important tools to protect your endpoints, right, which is where your adversary lives.
I have a question here too about SOAR, and I think that's great that we're trying to automate things as much as possible. I talked to somebody recently who said, anything that takes a week to do is a really good candidate for automation because we just don't have the skills or the people or the time to do that. Do we see a risk with creating our own denial of service with some of this, with the automation as we get more and more automated, that we're where we're moving to actually closing down ports and things like that, do we see a risk with that as well?
I mean, if you look back at the old movie War Games, right, they had the Whopper, right, where they were connected to all the silos to launch all the missiles. And when they got the wrong information in, they took actions that were wrong. And a lot of the things that SOAR can do today would be to take an endpoint off the network, disconnect it, maybe implement a firewall rule and block something. If those are things that aren't really well tested, and that, and you've got maybe some manual control over, you could possibly take an application down and cause more good or more problems than good.
I'll add to that. At our company, we've done an incident response plan assessment with our retainer service, and one of the highest recommendation we received was to automate some of these responses with our MSSP. If you can set the threshold, you don't want to wait for an alert to get escalated and reviewed, but if you have a high confidence or critical alert, you want to automate the response and then go back to review, and better to respond to that in that effort rather than waiting to review. So
good idea.
Next slide. So when we look at saying, hey, we're going to make some critical choices for securing your business, and I've used this model, which I think is very helpful, because deciding, do I want to do things myself? Do I want to get help? Or do I want to have somebody else do it for me? Is one of those big strategic decisions that you're going to make. So when you do it yourself, you're going to be relying on in-house teams to do a lot of that. Do it with me is cloud providers and integrators, managed providers, or consultants. And that do it for me is the kind of the old IT outsourcing, or completely using SaaS applications where it's a complete application that does everything for you. Go ahead, Kristen. You know, so when we look at what it is that we're trying to do, right, is we've got all these IT tools that we're putting together. And then we've got to take and apply our security point solutions to that. And there's always a long laundry list. So if it's on-prem, do it myself. I've got to do more on-prem or other kinds of integrated things. Go ahead, next click. You know, so as we talked about that big trend, that big shift, right? So we're moving to a lot more cloud integrated suites that combine cloud plus on-prem. So it's all got the same components. There's a firewall, there's a DLP, all of those same tools are present, and those are all now sitting in the cloud. And one more click. So when we go to secure these things, quite often security is already integrated or built into the native services. So I don't have to go and bolt on a separate tool or a separate product. And then it also has integrated compliance. It's going to tell me, am I meeting policies? And then that helps you with that goal number 4 of prove it.
Is there a difficulty when I move to an MSSP? I'm used to picking my own solutions, deciding who my different vendors are, and having kind of a plug and play environment. And now I'm going to an MSSP environment. Do I lose some of that control over product selection?
I think there are MSSPs that are out there that can work with just about everything. You know, you know, the market share is, if you look at the 70% of the market share in the MSSP market is companies that have less than 1% market share. So there's a lot of very small providers that can provide very customized services, or they can provide, you know, here is my one flavor vanilla that you can choose from. It's going to require, I can monitor certain types of things. I'm going to have to require only using a particular EDR agent or tools, or using the one that they provide. But the thing is that many of them are very flexible. They can manage stuff that you've got on-prem. They can manage stuff in the cloud. It's every possible way that you can do this, somebody is going to do it. It's really a question of saying, what do I have? Where am I going, right? How am I moving from right to left on this diagram so that you now pick a service that's going to best fit with where you're going and what you have.
Bez, have you found that same flexibility, or have you found a different story with that?
No, I would agree with David's point. There is flexibility. There is, you're the client when dealing with an MSP. So once you decide the industry you're in, what you're required to do, what's expected of you, that helps drive the requirements you have, which is your checklist of sort. Am I in healthcare? Is it HIPAA? That is a federal regulation. Am I in legal, which is, you know, from your information protection on PII. So that helps set the standard, and then you get to decide which MSP is going to best serve the requirements that you have from a scoping standpoint. So you do have flexibility. You are a client, and you should decide as a company to say which MSP is going to best serve me, and work with the tools, but also trust them as an expert to help guide you in some tool agnostic advice, hopefully, but to help them to be the expert, or allow them to be the expert to guide you.
Mm-hmm.
And Todd,
yes.
So, you know, it's interesting. I'm curious to the panel's opinion on this. You know, we have found from some of the data that we've done that, you know, 85 to 95% of the businesses, you know, with 25 employees to 500 employees haven't done a vulnerability management scan, don't know what their exploitable devices are. And maybe they did it at one time when they were all in the office, but now in the hybrid environment and they're all spread out, they haven't had a chance to get to the remote workforce, which can be significant from a percentage basis. As you look at this chart, are there some things you would recommend for that business leader that maybe has a part-time IT person or a desktop support service and is looking to, how do I get started in this area?
Stuart, I'll start with back to your earlier point around vulnerability scanning of our endpoints and such, but it's, you define your assets. What are the different ways an individual can access your system, which could be from a mobile device to your laptops to your servers and whatever other resources there may be. And when you talk cloud, you talk in containers. So you should, there needs to be a continuous vulnerability management program. You scan continuously, you see what the vulnerabilities are, you track them by criticality and how it affects your system and environment, and you start to work with all the different components within your company, but mostly IT. And when you hand it off to MSSP, you should say what your requirements are in order to remediate those vulnerabilities. So you have to continuously scan your environment. Vulnerabilities come each day and every day. You have to know 100% of your assets, so you're scanning at all times and remediating as appropriate. You can't remediate everything, but you should have a way to rank them based on if it's external facing or such. So have that program. Make sure your MSSP understands the things that you require. A report that they should send to you if it's 100% expected by the MSP to do. So.
Yeah, just to add on to that, in terms of where the solutions are going, right? There's, if you draw a matrix, right? There's managed versus unmanaged, right? The unmanaged is the home users or maybe IoT devices, right? And then you've got, can you put an agent on it or not? I think where more success is being achieved with vulnerability management is when you've got an agent that can sit, run on the endpoint, continuously analyze and understand what's going on, and then report that back up to a central console where you can now do compliance checking. It used to be vulnerability scanning was you put a scanner on a network, it launched the scan, and it had limited visibility into what it could see. So there are some big, I think, some big shifts in terms of how vulnerability management gets done and what tools are really going to be most effective. And dealing with, managed versus unmanaged is another problem as well.
One question before we move on to the next slide, as we move into this model where in the cloud we're much more tightly integrated between our products and our vendors, does it make it more difficult if we make a decision that we're not satisfied with that vendor or we want to change tool sets? Do we get locked in, or are we finding it's not that problematic to change from one to another?
I think that there are some tools that are very foundational, right? And you say foundations, how hard is it to change your foundation on your house when you want to change a component, right? There's a lot of stuff with, Microsoft's Active Directory has always been a foundational component for identity in many shops. And so if you've got that, you're maybe down a certain path versus going to something different. But there's a lot of cases where, the vendors will make it easy for you to make a transformation from one set of tools to another set of tools. But you've got to look really hard at what your foundations are and what's tied into those foundations and where's the licensing going with those things, right? Because vendors will definitely try to lock you into better deals for more stuff from a particular vendor. Is that what you find too, Bez?
Yes, I would definitely agree on the foundational aspect of a tool. And sometimes it's what do you want the tool to do and need it to do versus the new and upcoming one. So better to have the rubric. We always operate from a rubric of what do I need a tool to do, and we're currently even thinking through changing a specific tool, and that is assigned to an MSSP. So it could be difficult to sometimes get away from because the amount of work needed because you've migrated from on-prem to cloud, and now you want to change a tool. So you should also think about resource needed to move those tools, as well as resource to continue to manage once you change.
Great.
Just quickly, one thing I would say though is that more and more of the MSSPs pull logs and pull stuff directly from cloud. So pointing your stuff from one cloud to another cloud or two clouds at the same time is really easy.
Okay, great. So David, why don't you quickly take us through the different options that we have in executing the services with MSSPs?
Okay. Next question. Yeah, I mean, so, this is just a kind of a summary then of the different, ways or different people you can go to for doing stuff, right? Your in-house teams, there's certain advantages. Staffing is the number one concern. People can't get the people they want, right? Integrators are often people you've already got relationships with. They'll do you buy your products for them, they'll do set up an integration. They are also sometimes tied to key vendors. They can't do it all. And so they use partners as well. Consultants, I think, pretty familiar with what you can do with consultants. The managed and cloud providers, they're tending to provide a pretty complete solution. And you can buy those services through your integrators, or you can buy those direct. And then your SaaS solutions like a Salesforce or something, yeah, you just buy that service, set it up, you customize it internally the way you want to. IT outsourcing is typically very, very big companies are doing IT outsourcing, and they struggle with it. And I think a lot of it's because a lot of stuff is shifted to offshore resources, where it's maybe not as flexible. And then if you want to change something or add something, you're subject to the terms of the contract, and those can be difficult.
What's
Hey,
your
Todd,
favorite out
Todd,
of this? Yes.
we got a question from somebody saying, I'm looking to get started based on this conversation. Can you tell me when I would go to an MSP and when I would go to an MSSP?
I don't know if I see much of a difference necessarily between the two. Your managed services providers are going to be able to, they're managing more technology. They're managing your servers, they're managing workstations, they're managing more things, and they will have services then that kind of overlap with different things. But your MSSP is who you're going to go to build out that complete incident detect, respond, recover capability, which is, business requirement number 2.
All right.
Why don't we go to the next? Go ahead, Bez.
Oh no, that's okay. Really, to add to an MSSP, we have a separate, which is we have an MSP as well as an MSSP. And our MSSP, we rely on a tier 1 response for all alerts created from our SIM tools. So we send all of our logs, the logs get aggregated. So I think it's important to really go back and define what your business need is to see where to start from if you don't have either an MSP or MSSP.
And Dave, I think it'd be good to go through this next slide, talking about what that primary capability is in the incident detect, respond, recover capability, to see where that individual wants to position their services.
Okay, there's a lot of stuff on this slide. I'm going to kind of jump through it pretty quickly. But when you go out and hire your MSSP, right, to do the monitoring of your systems, right, they're going to go and collect the logs from your security devices. They're going to retain those logs for compliance purposes. Then they're going to put this into some kind of an analytics engine that incorporates threat intelligence, rules, and other things. And then the automated alerts are going to come off of that, and you're going to have your MSSP is going to provide a security operations center where they're going to diagnose and investigate those events. And maybe you can also incorporate some automation where it can reach out to your technologies and go and fix things. And another log source is really all of your cloud-based tools. And cloud-based tools tend to be, the log sources tend to be much higher quality than a lot of your on-prem log sources. Okay, next. So the stuff in purple here is really the stuff then that you will need to do within your organization. It's very difficult for MSPs to handle some of these things because your technologies. You've got the administrators and the people that are working with those tools. So they're going to do the best investigation that they can, hand that off to you, and give you advice and tell you what to go and do. And then you're going to go and update your technologies. And then if you have a breach or you have a bad incident, you're going to have an incident response team that they will be supporting all the way. And then there's a number of things that to build out this capability, that the stuff in blue then is the stuff that the MSP is going to do. There are some things that you're going to need to do. And then there are some consulting services and things around playbooks, IR planning, tabletop exercises, retainers, and post-breach remediation that MSPs can do for you. You can do yourselves, or you can go to other organizations. But all of the things in this slide is everything you need for a complete incident detect, respond, recover capability. And what we kind of do is slice this up to say which things are good for your MSP to do, which things do you still need to do, so that you can build out the right teams to be able to accomplish this.
I really like this slide because, you know, each one of these bubbles and sections we can look at and see where is this being done in our organization, because each of these things needs to be done somewhere, whether you're doing it inside or not, and then that staffing needs to be there, because I think some people have the impression you can just outsource the problem to an MSSP, and this is really nice because there's always that piece that's going to be held inside with the organization.
Yeah, MSSPs really stumble by trying to take over that client response piece. For a former employer of mine, they did a lot of that stuff through Romania, right? But it was one of the most expensive services that they had to offer, just because, but they wanted us to do it because, you know, we were doing that SOC work. So it's, if you want to move towards that, completely do it for me. There are vendors that can do it, but the most of them, you're going to need to be able to respond and update your technologies yourself.
Great. And I think before we get to the Q&A, in our last slide, we have some poll questions. I think that you wanted to put up. If you want to put up those poll questions, and then we'll go to the last slide, because there's kind of a shopping list, right, to make this incident detect, respond, recover capability come to life.
Thank you, Todd. So hello, everyone. This is Krista here. If you are maybe stepped away from your screen, would love for you to come back and join us to take part in the poll questions. If you could, I see people voting. We've got about 24% who have voted, so we'll leave this open just for another couple of minutes. As you're thinking through and processing the conversation that we've had so far, would love any additional questions you may have if you want to enter those in the chat. And if you have any other comments, feel free to add those as well. So thank you all for participating.
So Dave, maybe you could talk through while these questions are up. What are some of those things on the shopping list is in terms of prevention, detection, response tools, and services that might be needed?
Yeah, I mean, there's, you know, we talked a little bit about prevention tools, right? So there's things like firewalls and vulnerability scanning and identity tools and a number of different things. Some of those tools are going to work much better with certain MSSPs. There's going to be cases where you may say, okay, I'm gonna buy an MSSP that matches what I've got, and you may actually be much better upgrading a couple of your tools, your prevention tools, to give you better detection capability and make things work better. When you're looking at your detection and response tools, you know, you can build it. You can on your own. You might buy a SIM, or there's a lot of managed detection and response services. I think the new one is XDR, which really XDR incorporates firewalls and other log sources. Go back a little bit. Go back one.
Yeah, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, and then the other part of it is, you know, the rest of the capability that you need. How are you going to go and you know, what sorts of dedicated teams or on-demand teams do you need, right? For your internal SOC team, your incident response team, emergency remediation, you're going to want to have that stuff set up in advance, because if you're going to need somebody come back in and help you rebuild servers or recreate databases and things, you'll want to have an integrator partner that can help you there. Your IR planning and testing, just like with a BCP plan or a DR plan, you want to make sure that it's going to work. You've got to test it. A lot of the MSSPs have retainer services where you pay so much per month. You can use those hours to do a lot of these functions, and then they will parachute ninjas and security ninjas in to help you with the breach or with remediation.
Well, this is a great list, Dave. Lot to think about. I know we're coming up towards the end of the hour. I want to have some time for questions. So do we have any more questions, Stuart? That we'd like to ask?
We have one that just came in that you know, as a small business owner, what skills do I need to have in-house if I'm going to use an MSP and make sure it's used effectively?
Bez, you have a perspective on that?
I will start with at least having one IT person, but also a person who understands the requirements of the business. As I mentioned earlier, what are the basic security requirements you have or technology requirements you have, and then defining the scope of it that will help lead the expectations that a company can have to an MSP.
I would say you're typically going to have somebody whose job it is to manage that MSSP, right? Is to make sure that they're doing what they need to do, that they can provide you with regular reports and calls to go through issues that are happening. And then you have to have somebody that's going to pick up the phone to say, here is an investigation, here is something that's happening right now. You've got to go and do something. So somebody has to be able to pick up the ball and handle that particular function for you. And most of, like I said, most of the time, it's not, you don't have to respond in 60 seconds. You might have hours, days, weeks before you really have to do something to prevent a catastrophe. So it's not like you have to have in-house 24/7 teams handling that stuff. And that's always been a concern for people. But you have some time most of the time. So an important thing to consider.
Think of that person as a liaison, I think, between you and the MSP.
And in a lot of cases, if you have your own tools, you might shift those people who are running and managing those tools to being the guys that do that incident response and handling things. So often, if you've got some tools and things, you just shift the workload over to really the higher level, more important functions of knowing your business and responding versus eyes on glass, watching the ones and zeros roll down the screen and trying to figure out what's going on.
Great. Krista, I think we have one last poll question if you want to put that up, and while Stuart's asking our last question.
Yeah, we got one question specifically on this transition, and it is, you know, after we understand what devices are exploitable, you know, how do we contact or get a new MSP? And then what are some of the metrics that we ought to use to manage that MSP?
Dave, Bez?
The metrics is going to be important based on you want to define an information security policy or a vulnerability management program that says when a vulnerability is identified, if it's critical, you do it, you fix it or remediate it within 30 days. High mediums can be 90 days. However, sometimes these metrics can change. If it's a critical and it's an external facing, you want to do it an emergency patch. If it's critical but not an external facing, you can stick to that 30 days. and you want to define an SLA with your MSP that if a vulnerability that falls within those categories are not remediated in accordance to your agreement, there needs to be some form of a penalty. Either have it be a monetary penalty or some form to ensure those requirements are met, because that's going to be vital.
Yeah, I mean, I just have 2 tips. Number one is, rely on your integrators and vendors to help you out. They've got pre-sales people whose job it is to help answer questions, help to educate you about things. You may have a number of preferred providers. You can go out and question your peers or go out to figure out, hey, who works well in this particular space. I think the other thing that is necessary to be able to support that is you have to know your business. You need to have maybe a current state assessment. You need to have an inventory of your technologies, your locations, and all that stuff assembled, ready, and your staffing that you've got, so that you're in a position then to say, hey, I'm going to make a change. I know where I'm at today. I can start to pick out and strategize where I'm going to get to, and then you can work on that plan.
Great advice. So Krista, you want to show us the results of the poll? While she does that, Stuart, do you want to give us some closing remarks?
Yeah, I just, first of all, I just want to thank everybody for their time today. We are dealing with a lot of very small businesses, as I said, 25 employees to 500 employees that are trying to figure out what to do next with all of the ransomware attacks, all of the attacks that are coming their way. We have a lot of people that are, they have desktop support capabilities, but they're trying to figure out how do they get to an MSP, what MSP do they select, when do they go to an MSSP. So I want to thank everybody for their time today. That was really what today's discussion was all about, was to try and help with that. We also, just the next one coming up, Alan Alford and Helen Patton. Alan is from TrustMap and Helen is from Duo and Cisco, talking about how small businesses don't have anything. How do they get started with vulnerability management? How do they get started with multi-factor authentication to begin to help? And then we'll have a series of sessions with MSPs talking about how do they help small businesses and what they can do to help small businesses. And we're going to have somebody from HackerOne talking about how do they break into small businesses. So we'll have an interesting perspective from a lot of different people over the next couple of months. Once again, this is all about providing education for SMB leaders that might have a part-time person or one IT person. And that's why I appreciate everybody taking the time to do that today. Todd, why don't I turn it back over to you for some kind of closing comments for you and for each of the folks.
Well, thanks very much, David. I think this is a key area in growth for a lot of organizations to get the support from those people that have been doing this for quite a while, and not try to go it on your own. So Krista, do you want to put up the last slide? David, Bezawit, you want to give some brief final comments?
Go ahead, Beth.
I will say, know your business needs, have a scope, do your due diligence when you're hiring an MSP and the tools that they're going to be using, and making sure that they have the right controls to secure their environment, so you don't have the effect on your end. And know your shared responsibility matrix when it comes to the details that David laid out.
Yeah, I think, my thing is too, is that, don't feel you have to do it yourself. Go out and get help. Your vendors, your integrators, your MSSPs, they have people that will help you. And like I said, is that they cover every aspect of the market. You can find an MSSP for the smallest size businesses all the way up to the largest enterprises. So there's a fit for you out there somewhere. There are other experts in the marketplace, particularly your integrators, will know a lot about that.
Well, thanks to our panelists today for taking the time to share your expertise, and Stuart and Nodeware for sponsoring this series. I think it's very valuable.
Yeah, just we're right at the top of the hour. You know, please go to LinkedIn, participate in our events. If you have future topics and future speakers you want to hear from in this series, please let us know. And I just want to thank everybody today for participating, both our panel and our audience. And it will be on YouTube in a couple of days if anybody wants to review any of the materials that we're taking care of today. Please follow up with us if you have any questions as well. And with that, Todd, David, Bez, I just want to thank you for your time. And we'll end on time for everybody that has to go to their 11 o'clock Pacific, 2 o'clock Eastern meetings. Thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Guys.